Evolution is a subject that offers many questions and little answers, especially the canine family, specifically the wolf, otherwise known as Canis lupus. The wolf has been around for about 60 million years and started out in the Pleistocene period. In that time, they walked around four legs like today, but most scientists said that they looked like long-legged weasels and had partially retractable claws. They started to evolve more and more around 40 million years later in the Miocene. Now, here's where the dogs we see today start to form, along with cats, but these two animal groups all came from the same big family around 60 million years ago. As time went by, the legs and the brain of the wolf grew larger and their teeth became sharper and sharper until it hit the Pleistocene period, which was about 1 million years ago. In that time period, the wolf started to look more like what they look like today. Of course, since about 40 million years ago, more and more species started forming from the wolf. For example, there are weasels, raccoons, foxes, cats, dogs, coyotes, and etc. Scientists believe that they are still evolving, but at a much slower rate. There are some misconceptions about evolution in many organisms. One important mechanism about evolution is natural selection. The misconception is that evolution causes organisms to improve, but natural selection says otherwise. It doesn't provide organisms that are perfectly suited to their environments. Natural selection picks out which individual in a group of animals is good enough to survive in the conditions of the environment they are put in. So instead of evolution making organisms improve, it simply lets natural selection separate the strong from the weak and let the strong live on. For example, let's say there are two types of wolves, the strong and the fast. Now let's say that the prey, which is essential for survival, is deer. Deer are also very fast, so in this case, the fast wolves would progress on in life because they would catch up to the deer and eat it, while the strong wolves won't be fast enough to eat and the only food available. The misconception that evolution is not observable is false because there is fossil evidence of organisms adapting to survive to their constantly changing environment. An example of this is wolves grew stronger and smarter. The teeth of the wolves became sharper so that they can easily eat their prey. This tells us that other organisms the wolf was preying on were also evolving because the wolf had to adapt to continue to using those organisms as a food source. To test evolution, we could put a control group of organisms in an environment that they are not adapted to. Not a drastic change, but the more those organisms repopulate, the more likely those organisms' offsprings will be a mutation. If that mutation repopulates with another organism, more mutations will form. This will show that the organisms are evolving and adapting to survive in this new environment. Another misconception is that gaps in the fossil record disprove evolution. An example of this is a modern whale and its ancestor. There is no fossil evidence of the ancestors of the whale. The same thing goes for the same modern birds and their theropod ancestors. The fact that some fossils are not preserved does not disprove evolution. Evolutionary biologists don't expect that all transitional forms will be found, and realize that many species leave no fossils at all. Lots of organisms don't fossilize well, and environmental conditions for forming good fossils are not even that common. So science actually predicts that for many evolutionary changes, there will be gaps in the record. An additional misconception is that natural selection involves organisms that try to adapt. This is also false because natural selection leads to adaptation, but the process doesn't involve trying. Natural selection involves genetic variation and selection among variants present in a population. Either an individual has genes that are good enough to survive and reproduce, or it doesn't, but it can't get the right genes by trying. The final misconception is that natural selection is the only way that populations can change over time. But this too is also wrong, because sometimes other forces like sexual selection works against natural selection. For example, the peacock's tail is difficult to maintain and makes it easier for predators to see and catch them. But female peacocks are more attracted to it, so they are chosen by preference instead of naturally. This basically sums up the evolution of the wolf and why all these misconceptions are incorrect.